Hi. Hello, everybody. Thank you for coming. Is that all right? Do you want me to speak louder? It's good. Quick info about me. Been a product manager. Been spending 12 years in gaming, doing concept development and product design there. Got introduced to Grin in 2018 and kind of fell down the rabbit hole and got more and more involved. I'm now part of the Grin core team and spending some part-time, spending a lot of time on Grin in general and kind of part-time funded for the project to do some admin and project management, product management work. And at the side of that, together with some other people in the community, working on getting a startup off the ground that builds services on top of Grin. How many of you are familiar with Grin before? Raise your hand. How many have never heard anything about Grin before? All right, cool. So it's a good mix. So this is meant to be a kind of a high-level overview of some of the philosophies around Grin and how we work. Part of it is very much inspired by this quote from Dieter Rams, who was a product designer for industrial designer at Brown. Good design is as little design as possible. Not more and not less. That's the kind of the challenge, I guess. Indeed, we try to do as little design as possible. That's the Grin node as it's running. What is Grin? Grin is a cryptocurrency implementation that wants to be lightweight and privacy-preserving, scalable, and fair. And we'll come to these topics, and we'll touch upon some of these as we go through the talk. But first, a bit of Grin history, and there's a lot of like Harry Potter lore in our history. So in 2016, some anonymous individual joined the Bitcoin Wizards IRC chat, dropped a link to a paper in text file. It was written as a long text file, essentially. That was behind the Tor onion link hidden service URL. Was dropped into the IRC chat, and then that user disappeared. The paper was written by an anonymous individual who went under the pseudonym Tom Elvis Jedusor, which is the French name for Lord Voldemort. And it was proposing the MimbleWimble protocol, which is a name for a tongue-tying curse in Harry Potter lore. I haven't read the books myself, so I'm not too familiar with how it all was. But essentially what that protocol was doing was combining previous research, notably by Gregory Maxwell and another anonymous individual who had proposed one-way aggregated signatures, combining a lot of previous efforts into an elegant blockchain design that had not been conceived of before. This was picked up by the people in the IRC chat. Andrew Polstra improved on the paper itself. He had some errors, and he kind of formalized the paper and published it. And a few months later, in October 2016, another anonymous individual under the pseudonym of Ignotus Peverell proposed Grin. And Ignotus Peverell is some character in Harry Potter, and Grin comes from the Gringotts Wizardry Bank. But these days, we think less about wizards and Harry Potter and more kind of our own identity. But the protocol itself is minimal and lightweight. The project is minimal and lightweight. We try to do as little as possible and avoid overthinking stuff. Generally, about the coin itself, we get a lot of qualities from the MimbleWimble protocol in the sense that it's scalable because we don't keep a lot of data that is required to sync. You only download block headers, unspent transaction outputs, and something called kernels in order to do a full sync. And you get the same security guarantees as you would do if you do like a full node sync in Bitcoin. So you need less data to get the same type of security. It's fungible. We keep as little amount as possible on chain. There's no amounts, there's no addresses, there's no scripts on chain. And it's using proven math. The entire protocol relies on the assumption that the discrete logarithm problem is hard, which is something that's been trialed and tested and used in a lot of cryptography for many decades. It's easy to understand in its, if you're versed in the field at least, it's relatively easy to understand. This is a screenshot of a Grin Block Explorer, and this is how a Grin block looks. There's something called, does this work? Not really, but there's basically 3 components. There's a set of inputs that spends to a set of outputs, one of them being a Codebase transaction for a new block. And then there's something called transaction kernels. So each transaction will have a kernel that gets included on the chain, but it's very small, it's a small amount of data. And the thing with this is that it represents a transaction. You have a set of inputs spending to a set of outputs and a transaction kernel. In fact, an entire block is consisting of the exact same ingredients, and that is in turn how the entire chain looks. So all these kind of things, it's the same snapshot, it looks the same, and you kind of aggregate these together on different layers. So whether you're looking at it from the chain, on the block level, or on the transaction level, it all looks the same. The proof of work of Grin aims to be simple as well. It's the cuckoo cycle family that was created by John Trump, who's also part of the project. The proof of work consists of finding cycles in graphs. So you have a graph like this, you have different nodes, there's billions of these lines connected, and the proof of work itself goes out to find a loop, right? This is a for loop, 1, 2, 3, 4. But the proof of work is to find a 42 loop. That's like a valid solution. So you start with this, it's a big mess, billions of these connections. You trim them down to find a loop, and then you have a valid solution. And this is very simple in its spec as well. As you can see, it's only 42 lines of code. In terms of the emission schedule, it's also simple and straightforward. It's 1 Grin per second forever. We have 1-minute blocks. So a Codebase reward is 60 Grin. So every second there's a new Grin minted, and that leads to an emission rate that asymptotically decreases towards 0 over time because it's constant, it's linear, and there's no halving or anything like that. The supply grows linearly over time, right? So why this schedule? Why not some other, and so on? Well, first of all, I think I wasn't actually there for these decisions, but based on the conversation that I had, nobody could propose, a better solution than that. And this is very elegant, very simple. And why have X instead of Y? You have to kind of argue why add more complexity if you can actually prove that it's going to make a difference that makes sense and is good and healthy for the network. This was the most simple and elegant solution that the developers could think of at the time, and I kind of tend to agree with that. If you look at gold and gold production, not to make comparisons between Grin and gold, but here's an example of that, because we get a lot of criticism from community members and from a lot of people in crypto. Oh my God, there's no cap. There's no cap. It's not deflationary. The coin. It's not going to work. Well, we don't really agree with that. We do think that it's going to be a valuable asset over time, but the purpose of itself is not really necessarily to be valuable. It's that it's going to be usable. The launch, as was mentioned before, we made an attempt to launch it fairly. We did it the best we could in 2019. It's not very easy to launch a coin in a fair way. There wasn't any ICO. There were no pre-mine. There's no dev tax. There's no hidden clause or anything like that allows the early adopters to enrich themselves. There was a launch that was planned transparently and open in our Gitter chat. From day one, we had 100,000 GPUs mining the coin. Approximately. This was it's very different from the time when Bitcoin was launched, and there could be a few GPUs on the network mining for a long time because nobody really cared. We had a lot of spotlight and a lot of attention on us from before we even launched. So what about the development and how we work on development? How do we make that minimal and fair? First, mention on the code base and how it looks. It's written in Rust. It's about 35,000 lines of code. And Rust itself is almost our kind of extra 5 QA engineers on the team. Thanks to the fact that the entire chain is written in Rust, it allows us to avoid a big group of bugs and problems that might be undetected using other programming languages that are a bit more forgiving in how you write the code. So it's helping us a lot to be efficient once you kind of get through the overhead of initially writing Rust code. We don't really do, commitment features, roadmaps to the point where we, as like some sort of centralized team, are going to promise something to the network. We look at building features that make sense. We try to build them as fast and efficiently as possible, but not faster. And things get done when they're ready. I have a product management background, and this is my first open source project that I'm contributing to, and it's very different. It's a very different experience than how it is to do product management in a company. One of the bigger challenges that we had when I was working in a company is that it's fairly straightforward to build a lot of stuff, right? You work with a team, you put on the Gantt chart, and you do the sprints or agile or whatever you want to do. You build a lot of stuff, but are you building the right things? That's a different thing. Does it resonate with your users? Are your users picking it up and using it? As we can see in the space, it's not hard to build stuff, right? But there are more kind of challenges involved in succeeding with what you're trying to do. So we think a lot about the features that we add, and we're also a small team, and we'll go into a bit of our funding as well, but that's also kind of driving a lot of the decisions that we make in terms of what features to build on and what to focus on. We remove stuff that takes a lot of overhead to maintain. And as Hashmap, one of our developers, likes to describe, Grin is like a tree. So initially, it doesn't grow at all. It feels like it doesn't grow at all. After a while, suddenly that tree is taller than yourself, and 50 years later, you're gone, and that tree is providing shade for your grandchildren. So it's kind of a slow, methodical way of advancing, and we're not moving as fast as other teams, and that is basically by design. We try to foster collaboration within the ecosystem and the community rather than competition, but there's a bit of that as well in a friendly manner. An example of some feature that kind of went through the full loop was switch commitments, which is essentially a way to ensure or protect yourself against quantum computing that's coming. It was implemented, it was removed, and then introduced again. You can see here, it was implemented in 2017, then it was taken out, and then just before we launched, Jasper rewrote it in a better way, and then it got included. And part of the comment that was made by Igno, the founder, was basically it was too complex to build on, and it had a lot of overhead, so they wanted to take it out. This is kind of like how we like to think and how we like to work. Another example of something that's ongoingly talked about right now is a connection limit we have in the peer-to-peer network. So we're thinking about a lot of different ways to do it. Should we drop incoming connections? Should we drop existing connections? Maybe we accept a new one and drop some other, but which connection should we drop? How can we do this in a way that's elegant, that's minimal, that's fair, that's efficient? Grin itself, due to the nature of the protocol and the fact that we're using Schnorr signatures, and part of the protocol itself essentially is that it's interactive. So sender and receiver, when you transact, because there are no addresses as well, you need to do an exchange of information. So sender initializes a transaction, passes some data to the recipient sends something back to the sender can then finalize, send that to the node can then broadcast to the network, right? This is different from the Bitcoin model of addressing and how things work there. So how do we do transaction building is something we've been thinking a lot about. I'm part of a team that's working on Grin Block. It's a community project for a transaction building protocol. And there's other ideas in the ecosystem about how to do this as well. But there's a lot of kind of challenges around this. The counterparty might be offline. Do we want a way to be able to kind of send transactions to be stored somewhere that the recipient then can kind of pull, which is part of what we're doing with Grin Blocks. It's like an inbox for your Grin. Well, how do you do that in a privacy-preserving way? Sure, we end-to-end encrypt the messages, and so that only the recipient can read it, but the metadata there leaks privacy as well. So we're like kind of constantly thinking about this, and right now we're in the ecosystem proposing different approaches to this and how to handle it. Maybe with stealth addresses, maybe using some mixed networks. We're kind of researching the different approaches and try to think about what makes sense. Part of the problems as well is that if you try to like bootstrap it and throw it all on the P2P network, you add complexity on that level, and that can come and bite you later on when it comes to getting more nodes up running on the network, performing, running efficiently. So generally, like we didn't launch with like a defined solution for how to build transactions, and we're in many ways, in many different across many different things, we're agnostic. We say we don't really think that we know the best solution, and therefore we're not going to presume to know. We try to make proposals for stuff that makes sense, and see if others can come up with better ideas, and then we kind of adopt and adapt as we go along. Another example is the Grin web wallet. It was a project that was just before launch. One of the developers was working on. It was Angular.js. The web wallet didn't survive. It was just not lightweight enough in our approach in how we do development. The logic was that we can build a web wallet. We can build like a wallet GUI for Grin that everybody starts using, but that comes with a lot of responsibility as well. And then we need to maintain that, and we need to kind of make sure that it keeps performing perfectly. And is that really something that should be done on like top layer protocol level? Is that really something that we should be spending time on? Maybe it's better to let the ecosystem build the wallets and then experiment with the right approaches to build a wallet. What's the best wallet GUI for Grin? And I think in general, like wallet GUIs are not perfected yet. So why should we presume that we know how to do it the best way and to do it in an efficient way as well? So instead, we relied on the community, and it's been working to some extent because we have a lot of different community approaches and a lot of different proposals. Most of them are open source, which is great as well. And a lot of them are still in active development. On the other side as well, this is quite fractured in a way. And an end user comes to the project, and it doesn't have like a big shiny button to say, this is the wallet you download, this is how it works. Super easy onboarding, and from there you go. But I would argue that even if we had that at this stage, it wouldn't really matter that much, because the use cases for Grin at this stage is very limited. And most of the people who are buying Grin today are probably not buying it to use it in any case. So we're kind of, the logic is that this will need to be improved. We know it's a problem, but we want it to take some time and the time it needs. And we want multiple solutions to come from the ecosystem itself, rather than us committing to a solution and others kind of walking away from it. There was a report that came out a few weeks ago on ecosystems, and apparently we stood out. We had the most active developers based compared to the value of the network, right? If that's like some sort of a signal, we were an outlier there. I don't know if that's an outlier, though. I'm not sure I agree with that, but at least we're active and we're not worth much. So we're sexy, I guess. So what about governance then? Well, one thing I kind of haven't talked much about so far is that we don't, so because we don't have this ICO, we don't have this pre-mine, we don't have this dev tax, we rely entirely on donations from the community itself. It would have been easier to just be doing something out of greed and self-interest and devise like some super clever scheme of how we can make a lot of money on the network. But we didn't really want that. It's not really simple. It's not really fair. And to be honest, I'm not sure also that it actually works. You know, it depends on what the outcome is, but sorry, what the objective is. I'm sure you can make it work to earn a lot of money, but does it mean that you can make it work to get your project to succeed? I think the jury's out on that, and some of the projects that we've seen that raised a lot of money or spending a lot of money are not necessarily having more success than we have in terms of adoption, or at least not like the orders of magnitude compared to the orders of magnitude more money and funding they have, and bigger teams they have working on it. We're often mocked for being very naive. It's you know, how are we going to sustain ourselves if we're only rely on donations? We recently got an injection of 50 Bitcoin that were mined in 2011 from some anonymous individual who donated that. That's great. That really made a big difference for us. But now even like our total dev fund is less than what some projects are burning in a month. We see that as a kind of a feature in a way. It's not really a bug. And we don't really, no matter how we do, no matter how we twist and turn, we're never gonna, the project is not gonna succeed by having like paid developers. That's not how it's gonna work. You know, some developers get paid. There is a way to get paid from the project if you spend a lot of time. If you make a lot of proof of work, essentially, and you commit to the project, there's ways for you to get supported. But it's not like on the same scale as other projects, and we will always rely on open source contributions. It's the open source model, essentially. And we, by design, based on the emission and everything else, we don't discriminate for late adopters. So I don't know about you guys, but I've been looking, you know, before I got involved in Grin, I was looking at different projects. I was paying attention to the space. And often when you come across some kind of clever protocol or clever design of a project or whatever, and you can kind of see that it's already a bit too late because the coins have been allocated, and you know, the team has been formed, and they're all kind of making money now, and you know, you're a bit late to the show. And if you start contributing to the open source repo on GitHub, in a way, you're actually just paying them, right? You're paying them with your time, and they're making more money on you. And that's not really encouraging contributions. And that's the exact thing we wanted to design away. We're not getting rich on this. The developers don't, like the development community, we have some donations in Grin, but like we don't own any more Grin than anybody else. And if we do, we buy them like everybody else. And it's not like we're not going to get rich on this. You know, there's no way, I think at least. And it doesn't really encourage early adoption. So there's not like a design mechanism where you like run, get your Grins today because tomorrow they're going to be worth, you know, there's not going to be much fewer of them coming out. No, actually, it's fine. You don't have to get your Grins today. You can get them in next year. It's still going to be plenty of them to go around. And that's also a feature because we want people to use the coin and not feel like they're missing out. We look a lot, we think a lot about decentralization in the sense also how we try to work with the community. Everybody has equal rights to Grin and participating in Grin and the ecosystem. That doesn't mean that you get the same outcome depending on who you are. As I mentioned before, proof of work in the community matters in the sense that if you just show up today and start coming up with 10 suggestions that may or may not make sense, you might be listened to differently than somebody who's been around for a longer time. So the best way to start building up that, you know, your voice in the project is by simply contributing over time and showing that you're actually interested in sticking around and that you're doing it for the right reasons, and then people will listen to you more and more and more. That's at least my own personal experience. And there's plenty of stuff to do, no matter whether you're a developer, you know, graphic designer, QA engineer, technical writer, marketeer, events coordinator, whatever you want to be, like, we need you. Just start working. And And we do think that governance is difficult. Governance is a human problem in the end. No matter how you twist and turn it, it all comes down to us humans. And we don't really think that we have a perfect design for governance structure. So we wouldn't want to put it on chain or anything like that, because what if it's the wrong one? As we can see, even this is like a problem that's been going on for a long time in human society, and still people haven't figured out the best way to do it. So we're trying to stay humble there and not presume that we know the answer. We iterate on it as needed, and we constantly second-guess ourselves in terms of whether we're doing the right choices here with governance. Initially, there was no legal entity, there's no foundation. I did some research on whether a foundation made sense to have for Grin. The only thing I could come up with why it would be good is to have some entity that owns a trademark, but then you kind of have a central entity that owns a trademark that tells you what Grin is and what Grin isn't. So it's kind of a centralized thing, right? So why have that? Do we really need it? Do we really care? No, we thought we didn't really care about that, and we have no reason to have a legal entity either. And initially there was the founder and a small team of developers. Before we launched, that grew into, was added a little technocratic council of people to share the multi-sig keys of the donation addresses, and to take some consensus-style decision-making. And now after we've launched, iterating a bit further on this, and following the Rust programming language's governance model, we've kind of added an RFC process, which is similar to the conventional request for comments process of internet projects, where anybody who wants to make a substantial change to the protocol or the project itself first needs to write a proposal that then gets evaluated in the community according to some process. And beyond the kind of Grin Council, there's now also sub-teams that we're in the process of bootstrapping. So there's a node development and a wallet development sub-team. We're trying to start other sub-teams as well. There's a chance here for anybody who wants to get more involved to spin up their own sub-team to do work with Grin, and to basically push away as much of responsibility and authority away from the core team and push it out wider in the community as a way to avoid kind of centralization, paralysis, and so on. Things we do not do, we do not really apply for exchange listings. We don't sign NDAs because there's nobody to sign them. There's no CEO or anything like that. We're not establishing any partnerships. We receive a lot of proposals for it. It's very interesting. I never really figured out what they do, but it's not something we can do. And generally, we don't tell you what Grin is, what to do with Grin, what not to do with Grin, how Grin is, how Grin's supposed to be, etc. It's everybody's toy to play with and do whatever they want with. And it's part of also being censorship resistant in a way. The project is for everybody. There's a bunch of different independent communities, many different Telegram groups. There's a Grin Discord server that is run by some people in the community. There's apparently a Facebook page. There's a Twitter account. There's subreddits, WeChat groups. We have many different meetups in different parts of the world, and they're all kind of self-forming. And if you want to run your own event, just let me know, and I'm happy to help you with that. There's been a lot of forks, which is great. I see a fork as a compliment. It's amazing that somebody cares enough to fork us. Often I think most of them are forking and capping the supply schedule because they think that's really important. Some of them are adopting Bitcoin's emission rate, emission schedule, because often actually trying to catch up with Bitcoin in a way, and also having like a little sneaky paragraph in there for development, which is fine, good for them. Personally, I can see the logic of why Bitcoin had the emission schedule that they had when they launched. It feels a bit arbitrary, the amounts and the halving and everything, how it works. So I wouldn't try to put it in a project today, but it makes perfect sense to me why Bitcoin did it back then. But we're not in 2009 anymore. Community projects, there's a Grin, there's many Grin blockchain explorers. There's an alternate implementation in C++, who also does a GUI, a node, a wallet. It's quite popular. There used to be a .NET implementation and a Go implementation. They ended up being inactive. We're hoping somebody's going to pick something up and contribute. Most of all, we'd like you to contribute, of course, to the Rust project itself, the main project. Grinbox is one of the projects I mentioned, is something I'm involved in. There's also Nocturnal which is a payment processor. There's a bunch of other wallets, as we mentioned. There's different software miners. There's different mining pools supporting Grin, exchanges that have listed Grin on their own without us kind of being involved. We're happy to answer questions, but not really paying anybody for it. And that's mainly it. If you want to find out more, if you want to learn more, if you want to start contributing, here's some information. There's also a weekly newsletter that goes out on Mondays, which I maintain. So you can kind of, if you want to like passively observe and see what's going on with Grin, you can subscribe to that. And I think that's it for me. Thank you for listening. Thank you for your time. You can reach out to me there on Twitter, Keybase, or Telegram. And I'm happy to take any questions. Yeah, it's a good question. I didn't really spend a lot of time on that. The idea is to be, we believe that, that an electronic form of cash is important for society to be able to be functioning as a democracy. Right? Or rather, let me say like that, I believe that, right? I can't really speak for the project. Electronic cash is important for democracy, in my opinion. And we're seeing that society is moving away from physical cash, going on to electronic transactions, but there's not really a privacy-preserving way, a fungible way to transact online. And that is lacking, and that's important. And that's what we're trying to build, a way to transact in a way that you would with cash online. And then, once you start thinking about cash, then how does cash behave? Well, cash and the dollar bill or the pound note doesn't really have a memory, doesn't really care about who had the pound note before you and what it was used for. You just have the pound note, you go to a store, and you pay for it, you get your change. That's the functionality that is important to have online as well. And that's why fungibility is important. And if fungibility is important, you need something that is privacy preserving, that doesn't make a difference between this dollar bill or that dollar bill. And that's kind of how we get into these type of features. So hope that answers your question. It's a great question. It's something I think a lot about myself, and constantly second guessing. I'm on the council myself. And first, how it came to be and how people were added was by, the Igno, the benevolent dictator for life, creator of the project, said, hey, okay, some people were talking about it because people were asking governance-related questions. Myself, I was one of them. And they said, all right, let's start, a little technocratic council. And then people get added by other members of the technocratic council. There's no elections. There's no fixed term periods, because it's very hard to do elections in a community like ours in a way that is not an attack vector. And it's not a great solution, but it's the kind of the solution that we have. And so when we had this technocratic council, and we were eight people or something on it, and then questions starts coming up, all right, how do we add more people? How do people leave? Can we kick people out? And we try to basically start formalizing some of these concepts. And still, we don't know how to have fixed terms or anything like that. But one of the approaches that we took then was to say that, look, this is problematic. And we can't just add more and more members here all the time, because then we'll have a parliament at some point, and that's going to be a nightmare to manage. So what we instead decided to do was to try to push away responsibility as much as possible away from the council so that we don't have this risk so much centrally. So we're trying to do that. It's not going, it's working to some degree. It's not going perfectly because it's hard to find people that are motivated enough to put in the extra hours and effort to do it. But I guess that's in a way good as well, because the project as a whole has like a filter. Because there's no way to make money easily, then you only get people who are actually caring enough about it to get involved. And that's a kind of a good filter. We don't have many speculators coming on board and people trolling or whatever, distracting. We try to push away responsibilities, and hopefully people will be there picking it up, and maybe as a result, they can then in turn push it out, so we have multi-layers of governance. Is it going to be enough? I really don't know. And we're kind of blessed so far in the sense that we haven't had too many contentious matters to discuss. At some point, there's going to be something that the community wants very much. Maybe the council has a difference of opinion, and there's going to be some sort of a debate and discussion there. But Grin is not a democracy, and it probably will never be. We try to make like rough consensus decisions, but we don't let anybody have a veto either. It's a human problem, and yeah, we don't really know how to deal with it properly. So on a high level, less data is stored on chain. So in Bitcoin, the addresses and the amounts are stored on chain, and the entire history of an output or like a coin from the point of the Coinbase, the chain is kind of stored, and that's kind of used to validate the correctness of the UTXO. On the Grin side, there's no amounts and no addresses on chain, and only the unspent outputs are kept. And you don't need to have the full history of the coins to validate that it's a correct spend. That itself doesn't mean that it's privacy preserving that way, but it just means that less data needs to be stored in order to do a full sync. It makes it easier for nodes to be bootstrapped, and in 10 years' time, the network won't have, like, it won't grow with the number of outputs. Yeah, so before launching, we committed to having hard forks every 6 months for the first 2 years. That was the commitment. We've now been live since January, so we've had one hard fork, which went very smoothly and uneventful. We're now planning for the next one, and part of doing that is that we do it in the open, and we kind of it's already in the code, the hard forks. So they're like, it's already done in that sense. We just need to make sure we're ready for it, and we have a version that's compatible with the next version in time for the hard fork. How we do after these schedule, and the reason why we had that, by the way, the motivation for that was to protect the ASIC resistant proof of work for the time that we had it, and also to fix all the stuff that we got wrong when we launched, basically. And we basically anticipated that we're going to need a lot of consensus breaking changes to be introduced. After these 2 years, how we're going to do it remains to be seen a bit. I think there's going to be this debate about hard fork versus soft fork and what's good for the network and how to do it. One of the approaches that I'm trying to suggest is that we are careful about making consensus breaking changes and not doing it too frequently, and try to do it in like an ordered fashion and trying to put it in now, like planning ahead to do it now in a nice way, and so that once the 2 years have expired, we're in a process where we maybe will be able to handle this in an elegant way. But who knows what's going to happen, to be honest. There might be a lot of disagreements at the time, and some of the consensus breaking changes might lead to contention. And these are just the things that we have to manage and acknowledge.